Hello, for those joining, we'll get started in about a minute or so, just to let everyone get into the call before I start. Alrighty, so I think we're just going to get started. This webinar is being recorded, so if there's anything I say throughout the next hour, hour and a half that you want to go back to, we are going to be posting it on our website, and I'll share out the link to the recording once it's posted to everyone who registered for today. But we are here today to talk about tackling the PhD defense, which is one of our newer sessions in the GRADnavigate web series. So maybe you have come to our other sessions on things like comprehensive exams, but we also have some sessions coming up this spring term. We have one on the comprehensive qualifying exams, we have one on how to say no, and we have one on the final year. Which will include things like alumni benefits and transitioning with like the timeline and resources to making that transition to whatever is next, whether that be a postdoc position or a career in industry, whatever the case may be. Those are sessions that are coming up, and at the end of this event, I will share the link with all of you if you're interested in joining. So before we go further, I'd like to share a territorial acknowledgement. The University of Waterloo acknowledges that much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land granted to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Our active work towards reconciliation takes place across our campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building, and is coordinated within the Office of Indigenous Relations. As a personal acknowledgement, as someone whose ancestors settled in the territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendake, Neowentio, and Mississauga peoples, I seek to learn more about the injustices Indigenous peoples face, as well as to call to actions advocated for by attending workshops, reading, and conversing with the people around me. I recognize acknowledgements like this are only one step towards reconciliation, and there's still a lot of work to be done across Canada related to the inequities, barriers, and damage colonization has caused. So the Office of Indigenous Relations is a fantastic office on campus that's available to you. They have fantastic events that happen, especially in September, with their largest events being the powwow that they run. They have events on training. They have fantastic resources and online kind of informational training. So I highly recommend checking out the kind of resources and information that are available. So in terms of who I am, some of you maybe have seen my name and face floating around some of the Touchtone emails you've gotten. Maybe you come to some of our events. Maybe some of you were even at our PhD candidacy celebration yesterday. But if you have not seen my face come up before, I am Dr. Ashley Ryan, and I am the Graduate and Postdoctoral Programming Specialist over at Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs. A little bit of an interesting thing about me is that I did my undergrad, my master's, and my PhD all at the University of Waterloo. So I finished my PhD, so I defended as well in 2023 before transitioning to Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs as a full-time staff member. And as a graduate student, I also worked for the Graduate Student Association, helping students navigate these kind of things and supervisory relationships and everything under the sun related to grad students. So I'm excited to be here today to help you kind of navigate what those next steps might be for you. So in terms of it all about the defense, I have a little bit of a poll because I'm kind of interested to see kind of who's in the call with us today in returns of how far out you are from your planned defense state. So I'm going to launch a poll. It's going to pop up hopefully on your screen. And the question is, what are you hoping to defend? And of course, your date, it might be quite flexible, especially if you're a few years out. That kind of date might change, or when you're defending might change. But as of right now, in your mind or your initial planning, when are you looking to defend? And I'll leave you for a minute to do that. Alrighty, and well, before we look in this, I'm also going to mention that on the bottom of your screen, there should be a closed captioning or CC option if you're looking to have kind of a closed captioning pop up as I'm speaking. As I said, this is also being recorded, and you should also see hopefully a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So at the end of this event, after I've done all my talking, we're going to turn over to the Q&A. So feel free to pop in questions as we go, and I can address them at the end. But you don't have to wait till the end to put it in the Q&A. Put that up whenever you like, and we can address it later. All right, so looking at the defense, when are we hoping to defend? It looks like the majority of you are looking to defend either this term or next term, which is super exciting. And this is kind of what I figured would be the case with this group. But we also have some students that are a bit further out that maybe are kind of still in the writing stages within the next year. We have a few here looking in the next 2 to 3 years. So maybe these are students, some of you maybe just kind of wrapped up your comprehensive or qualifying exams potentially. But that's awesome. Thank you so much for participating. So let's just jump right into it. All about PhD defense. What is it? Who's there? What happens? What does the presentation look like? We're going to cover all of that. The caution I want to share right now before we move forward is that this information specifically in this webinar is designed for PhD students at the University of Waterloo. And I say that because if you are a master's student here today, welcome. By all means, please stay and learn about the tips and tricks, because many pieces of information will be still helpful for you with your own defense processes. But I just want to let you know, if you are a master's student with a defense milestone, please have specific conversations with your supervisor and department, because master's defenses are not as standardized across the university. So what yours might look like as a master's student may look very different than what I'm about to talk about. For PhD students, there is still a little bit of flexibility depending on kind of field and discipline norms, but at the end of the day, the defense process, who has to be on the committee, all of those things, the timing, the chair, all of those kind of pieces are more standard and universal for the PhD students at the University of Waterloo. So again, if you're a master's, a lot of this information is still going to be helpful. I just want to give you a caution that yours might look a little different. So what exactly is a defense? Well, at the base of it, usually it's the final major milestone in your degree. But many of you maybe have actually experienced similar defense-like processes as you've been going through your degrees already. Whether you've had to defend comprehensive exams, maybe you've had to defend your thesis proposal. Many of you maybe even did a master's degree where you had to defend your thesis at that stage. Whatever the case is, typically in the context of what we're talking about today, it's that major milestone at the end of your degree. During the process, what it is, it's a unique opportunity to share with other experts, so those on your committee and those who are watching your defense potentially, what you did as part of your PhD research. And for masters, if you're here looking at that and you have a defense. what you found, what you discovered, and really like that so what portion. Like, why is it important? Why did you pour your life into it over the last 4 to 5 years? What implications does it have? All of that good stuff is going to go into that kind of conversation and dialogue. In terms of the purpose of the defense is a few different things. It's to allow you to show the mastery of your subject. So it's kind of like it's a challenging piece to see, like, yes, this person is ready to receive their PhD. They have mastered this subject area. They've done that deep dive. They've done the work to earn their PhD. Prove that you're the author of the work, which of course, as you can imagine, as PhD students is going to become, I believe, even more of an important piece of the defense process, especially now in the age of generative AI. And third, to demonstrate your ability to engage into scholarly discourse in your research area. So by that, I mean, even if, you're asked a question about something that might be related to your research that you specifically maybe didn't go dive into, they want to see that you have the ability to at least think about what it could be related to and maybe make like theories or hypotheses and ideas and concepts of what might be at play and have those kind of conversations, those brainstorming conversations with other experts related to your field. So when we're getting to the PhD defense, who is in the room, or at least who is on your committee? Your examining committee, for those who maybe haven't pieced it together quite yet, you'll have, of course, your supervisor or your supervisors. If some of you, I bet you some of you in the room probably have co-supervisors, so both of them will be on your committee. You will have an internal member of your department, so it will be another faculty that's appointed in your department. So for example, I'm from Department of Sociology and Legal Studies, so it would be another professor, assistant professor, associate professor, whatever the case may be in my department in sociology. Then you will have what we call an internal external, which what that is, it's a faculty member at the University of Waterloo that's not in your department. So in my case, in sociology and legal studies, my internal external came from psychology at the university because her work happened to kind of be related to what I was doing, but from a different field's perspective, but she was still at the University of Waterloo. And then you will generally have an additional member, which is typically another faculty member in your department. Sometimes it could be an adjunct professor. For example, there was a researcher in my field who was going to be a very good resource on my committee throughout the process that we wanted her involved. And so she acted as the additional member. But she used to be at the University of Waterloo, but at the time of my PhD process, she was over at Cornell University in the States. So there was a process that could be done with the Faculty of Arts to have her appointed as an adjunct member to count as this additional member on my committee. So that is a possibility. And then, of course, especially unique to the PhD process that you're not going to see at the master's level is what we call, of course, the external examiner. The external examiner is someone who basically comes into the committee the very last second, like really at the tail end of your degree, right before you're about to defend, who is supposed to act as that like unbiased person who has not been involved with you, your supervisor, your committee, your dissertation to date, to kind of step in and kind of do that evaluation. This external member has to come from a different university. It could be Laurier, it could be Toronto, it could be Hawaii. You could have an external member coming from Germany. Wherever the case may be, someone who has the expertise in your field. This external member has to be what we determine as a beyond an arm's reach of the PhD candidate and the supervisor. What this typically means is that you can't have any prior like collaboration and major relationship with this external person, and same with your supervisor. So if you're thinking of an external member who might be good on your committee, but they're best friends with your supervisor, or they've done these heavy collaboration projects with you in the past, unfortunately, they cannot be your external examiner. In terms of one thing I want to say about the external examiner is that sometimes the process takes a while to get one organized. So if you're thinking of defending in the next 2 to 3 terms, start thinking about options of who your external examiner could potentially be now. So the process of choosing external examiner might be looking a little different from department, but in my case, I worked with my supervisor to put together a list of options of potential external examiners for my dissertation. And then we kind of rank ordered them in priority of who we would like to ask to be the external examiner. And then what happens is that goes up to the faculty. The faculty reaches out to the potential examiner and says, hey, would you be willing to serve as the external examiner on this person's dissertation defense? Sometimes they're way too busy and they can't do it. So then the whole process has to start again from going to the next person. Sometimes they'll say yes. So that, as you can imagine, that timing piece can take a while to lock one in, as per se. So start thinking about those things early on. You will have at your defense a chair to oversee the defense proceedings. And so we're talking about someone who's going to be there to do the timing of who gets to speak when. They're going to be doing all of the welcome introductions to the room. They're going to tell you, when to start your presentation. They're just kind of the moderator of who does what when, basically. This chair for your defense is going to be assigned to the defense by Graduate Studies Postdoctoral Affairs. It's most likely, it's not going to be anyone that's related to your department. It's typically not even going to be in your faculty. So for example, for my defense, the chair that was assigned to me was a faculty member over in, I believe, computer science. So it can be quite random across the university who is assigned as a chair at your defense. And an interesting thing about the defense process is that most defenses are open to the public, meaning that you can bring friends if you want to, you can bring family members if you want to. Some people really, from my experience, love to do that. They love to have that celebratory piece as they're having that kind of conversation in the room. Some people are kind of the opposite, like me, where I was like, no, please, no friends and family come. Just I'll tell you what happens afterwards. So whatever the case may be, you can put that invitation out so you don't have to. But there will be a call that goes out across the university because technically anyone can come to your defense. So there is a potential that you might have other graduate students coming to your defense, other faculty members, staff, employees, technically members of the public. It technically is open to the public. Whether people are going or not, I've seen kind of depend on the field. I see sometimes in more engineering, you're seeing more people go to them. In my department, it was like not as common to see tons of people show up. So again, that really depends, but it is open to other people attending. And I'm seeing questions already pop up in the Q&A, which is amazing. It means that it is working, and I will get to all those when we're in the Q&A. But thank you for putting those in, and feel free to keep on adding those. So where is the defense? Well, at the University of Waterloo, it might be online or remote. It might be hybrid, or it might be fully in person. It's going to really depend on your department. It's going to depend on geographically where people are located, right? Because if your external examiner is in a different continent, there's not a good chance that they're going to be flying all the way to Waterloo region to be there in person, right? And so that's why the online and the hybrid I've seen are becoming more prevalent or popular. But there are some that are fully in person still, especially if your external examiner may be more local, for example, from Guelph, Western, McMaster, whatever the case is. In terms of like, if you have the option of doing it in person or online, like if that's kind of like in your ability to kind of pick and choose, there are pros and cons to each option. Both can be great for different reasons. Again, it's going to depend on where you are. Like for example, some of the pros at doing it in person is that I've heard from other students, and I experienced this myself, it's like it can be more of a congratulatory feeling when you're finally done and get that pass from your committee, because everyone's in the room, everyone can, do the clapping and do the congratulations and all of those things, which can still happen to some extent online, but it's kind of like less climactic than if it's in person. Another benefit to in person is that it can be, if you're doing it, it can be easier to understand body language and facial cues from your committee members and things like that. In person, then you're relying specifically on the university internet system, for example, university tech, all of those things. In terms of some of the benefits to online, and again, like you can see in the pictures, I've done kind of online and in person for different defenses. Online, some of the benefits are you can be, maybe more comfortable. Like for in my case, I did all of my PhD work, especially with it being heavily during COVID. I did a lot of the work at my kitchen table, and then I did my defense from my kitchen table, which is a benefit in itself because you're sitting physically in the same area where you've done all of the memory work, all of the reading, all of that writing. And so there may be some psychological benefits of recall there. But it could be more, comfortable. Tweeting, there's a chance I could have been wearing pajama bottoms. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe I was wearing fully professional clothes. I can't remember. You can be in your own space. You have access to your own washroom, your own bathroom. You have access to your own computer setup. You can figure it out ahead of time. You have access to, your water right there if you forget anything. So again, there are some benefits of both options. And I had fairly decent experiences with my master's defense being in person over in PASS, and my online one for my PhD in 2023. In terms of tips, we're going to talk about some tips today for both, but GSPA on our website, we do have tips for remote and online defenses specifically. And we also have tips for our in-person defenses as well. All right, so what happens at the defense? So we've covered who's at the defense, kind of where it's going to be potentially taking place. What really goes down at this defense? Well, sometimes is not super well known. I didn't even start really digging into it until a few months before I personally defended. So what will typically happen is that chair that I was talking about that is assigned to your defense, they're going to do like the welcome and introductions. They're going to be like, welcome to Ashley Ryan's defense. This is why we're here today. This is the title of the dissertation that is up for defense. They're going to most likely introduce those that are on the committee, so everyone is on the same page of who's in the room, though your committee members may also introduce themselves. They are going to talk about the defense rules, the proceedings, how the defense is going to play out, and they will act as that timekeeper for faculty members asking you questions in the questioning period as well. You will then, after the chair does their component, you will give your oral presentation, which is typically no longer than 30 minutes. And we're going to dive more into the presentation bit in, I believe, the next slide. So once you do your presentation, it of course opens it up to the more well-known defense activity, which is the question period. And so how this works is it goes in rounds. So it's not just a free-for-all of who has questions. It has specific rounds of dedicated time for each person on your committee. And each person on your committee will take turns and will have 15 minutes specifically, and it's strictly timed by your chair, to ask you questions. So in that 15 minutes, it may not be one question. Maybe it is one question that takes the whole 15 minutes. Maybe it's a few questions. Whatever the case is, they will have that 15-minute period. Once all of your committee members have the opportunity to have their 15 minutes to discuss your research with you and ask those questions, the chair and committee will decide if other rounds will be necessary. Typically, there's going to be around 2 rounds. I haven't personally seen more than that. And typically, the second round, what I've seen is usually fairly shorter. Like usually that main first round of questioning is like the main beefy round. Typically, when it gets to the second round, you'll start seeing committee members potentially, pass on their turn because maybe they had questions that were already addressed in the conversations. Maybe it was, someone else asked a question they were going to ask you, or maybe they have no other concerns. Whatever the case is, typically that first round is the major round. The second one tends to be a bit less, but it could be more. It really depends on the situation. And theoretically, there could be more than 2 rounds, but I haven't personally seen it. So let me know if you have, but I don't typically see it happening too often. In terms of timing, I would say, and again, this is it's not very, very, very standard of exactly how long your defense would be. I would plan in the ballpark of 2 to 3 hours for the defense process for your PhD defense. As sometimes there will also be like a break in between so that you can, pop out, go and use the washroom. But typically that 2 to 3 hour time range is what you're going to be looking at. In terms of what it looks like in the conversation, the dialogue that occurs, a good defense, and by saying a good defense, I don't mean necessarily that it's all on you. I mean a good whole situation, like having a good committee and a good dissertation, the whole thing. A good defense should feel like a conversation with other experts. And it can be quite an exciting process, right? This is the only time, because let's be honest, like the chances of someone reading your entire dissertation after you finish this process is like very, very small. This is that one time that someone has gone and read your entire dissertation, or they should have, and is excited to be asking you questions about it and having that conversation. It's exciting because this is one of the only times it's going to really heavily happen, at least in one piece. And so it should feel like that positive kind of conversation, not an interrogation. At least a good defense shouldn't be. This is not to say that you're not going to get challenging questions. There's a really good chance that you might have some that kind of throw you off for a second or make you think for a minute. And it can be a challenge, and it's meant to be a challenge to see that you are got to the point that you should have your PhD. But it should theoretically be less grilling and more back and forth conversation with your committee members, ideally. If you have a inkling that it's not going to be like that, or if you have challenges relationship-wise with your supervisor or committee members, that's a whole different conversation that we can chat about as well, and I have resources for that if you are in that situation. So once they've gone through those questioning rounds, the chair is going to ask if anyone else in the room has questions. So remember what I was talking about is that your defense is technically open to the public, and you may also have family or friends in the room. You may have colleagues in the room, other faculty, staff, whatever. They will technically have the opportunity to also ask you questions. I would say, this is probably field dependent. In my field, from what I've seen, it isn't like heavily common that you're going to get a bunch of questions at that stage from the audience. Typically, they'll leave it at that. I mean, really, to be honest, at that point in the process, people have potentially been there for hours. So they typically, it will be kind of crickets from what I've seen. It might not play out that way for you, but that's kind of what I've experienced myself. What the kind of questions that you get at that stage, it's really going to be dependent on who's in the room, right? Like you might have other experts in the room that were interested in your topic that are going to ask you super relevant questions. You may have questions that are totally, completely amiss or out of scope, just because, you know, maybe there's someone not, you know, like experienced or in the loop at all related to your field. So that's possible. But even if you don't have an answer, you could always do, again, like we we're talking about that brainstorming piece of saying like, you know what, like that is a good question. It's totally out of the scope of what I do, but I imagine like this thing over here might apply that they could be looking into. After the questions have been completed, the chair is going to ask you to either leave the room or the Zoom call or whatever the case is, wherever your defense is. The committee is then going to deliberate and then we'll come back to provide the results to you. I'll just take 1 second to make sure that they're all right. So we will move on. And again, this is a lot of information. It is being recorded and I'm going to send you out the link to when they're recording when it's up, and it will be on our GRADnavigate page that I'll share at the end as well. So in terms of your presentation, what should it look like? I get this question a lot as someone who finished, like I did my PhD at the University of Waterloo. And so those in my field, I've had a few students reach out to me to say, you know, they've asked me for my dissertation presentation slides. They've asked me for some tips on that and what advice pieces, like how mine went down, what presentation piece I did. And I did the same thing as a PhD student asking upper year students. The first thing I want to say is that have a conversation with your supervisor early about the norms of the presentation in your field, because some of the examples, especially the structure of the presentation, it's possible that it could look very different in your field. So have those conversations with other recent defenders, your program coordinator, your supervisor, another faculty member, whatever the case is. But these are the things that I've commonly seen pop up and that were the case for me. So typically it's going to be an oral presentation with slides. You're going to want to keep your slides clear, so not like a ton of text like blocking out the screen, which is fairly good practice for any sort of presentation, like if you were lecturing, for example. Your presentation piece for your defense will be less than 30 minutes. So it is an opportunity. Of course, you've done so much work for your dissertation, but what this presentation is doing is just packing it very higher view into a little tiny gift with a nice little bow on it. So it is quite a small chunk for the presentation piece. Typically, your presentation should focus on the following things from what I've been told by faculty members and what I've seen from other presentations. You're going to want to provide a fairly brief overview of what you did, drawing it back to your research questions, get the refreshers going. But you're not going to want to go like too into the weeds, into depth of what you did. Because a lot of that is going to be covered at the proposal stage, and you'll have to remember that the audience in the room that are evaluating you should have read your entire dissertation. You're going to talk about the key findings. You're going to talk about your research contributions to the field and academia. And then, of course, a bigger one, since we're going to be starting to get to the bigger picture pieces that we'll talk about in a few minutes, is the implication of your research. Which many of us talk about as the so what. Why is it important? Why did you do it? Like, why does it apply to other people? Like, why is it important? I also want to say, like I was mentioning about not getting too much into the details, especially because you have such a small time frame. But if you get too much into the details and justifying yourself and your dissertation as you go in your presentation, then that just kind of, it opens the door to more and more things at the questioning phase. So there are things that you're going to be doing as you prepare for your dissertation that you're going to be like, oh, I think I'm going to get asked about this, and I'm going to get asked about this. My tip for you is you don't necessarily want to or have to address it in your presentation, because then you're going to be prepared, because if it's something you know is going to come up in your defense, you're going to be issuing it and justifying it and talking about it at the questioning phase. So don't get too into the details too heavily. What can be the outcomes of the defense? So again, like I was talking about, when the chair asks you to leave the room and your committee has a conversation about what should be the outcome. These are the 3 different options that your committee will be deciding on. And the decision is determined by majority vote. If there is an absolute tie for some whatever reason, which is definitely not common, but if there is an absolute tie of someone having to get, for example, an accepted versus a re-examination, what will happen is the tiebreaker will be the Associate Vice President, Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs at Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs, who will read your dissertation and make the tie-breaking vote. Because the defense is not purely just from the questioning portion, it is the defense of the actual written project as well. So your exam can be one of 3 outcomes. You're either going to get accepted, and what this means is that the committee is satisfied with the dissertation and your defense of it, and you will have little to no changes to make before submitting it to UW Space, which is our online archive of thesis and dissertations, which has to be accepted there before you are considered degree complete at the University of Waterloo. If you get an outcome of accepted, you have up to 1 month to become degree complete. So by doing the paperwork, getting it submitted to UW Space, doing whatever tiny revision might be necessary, but it's small pieces at that point. Option 2 is you could get an outcome of accepted conditionally. And what this means is that you don't have to defend again. The defense and the thesis or dissertation are acceptable, but some slightly more major changes may be required. Like maybe your committee wants you to add a page somewhere or a couple paragraphs here or there, adding some more information on something. So nothing that's like groundbreaking in that you have to like redo things, but you might just have to add a few pieces before being able to do that submission to UW Space. Typically, if there are revisions required to this extent, it's going to be determined at your defense what's required and who has to sign off on the final revisions before you submit it and become degree complete. Sometimes this is just one committee member who is pushing for those revisions. Sometimes it's just your supervisor. Sometimes it's the whole committee. It really kind of depends on what's up. If you are given this option, you have up to 4 months to become degree complete. So that gives you a bit more time to do the work, get it submitted to UW Space, all that stuff. Then in the very rare circumstance, you could theoretically get an outcome of re-examination. So the outcome of re-examination means that the committee is not satisfied with the defense and or your dissertation, and you must be re-examined within 1 year. So in this case, you're not necessarily like starting from scratch, but you will have to probably do a decent amount of changing with your work, and you will have to do the defense again. Like I was saying, this outcome is very rare. I have not personally met someone who has gotten this outcome in my roles throughout the university or as a grad student when I was there. But it could technically happen. It's just not common. There is a very, very high chance you're going to get the accepted or accepted conditionally option. So I wouldn't I know it's easier said than done, but if you feel that you've put in the work, you've done prepared, and you're ready for the defense, I wouldn't worry too much about the process of having to potentially defend again. It's really not common. There is one other thing I wanted to mention, if I can think about it. I lost in my mind. Oh yes, here it is. I want to talk to you about the logistics of going to defense, and why the reexamination is uncommon. If you think about it like logistically, your supervisor and committee should not be encouraging you to go to defense if they don't think that you are ready. So if they're saying like, yep, this seems defensible, it's good to go, and your supervisor is on board with that, and your committee is, the chance of getting a re-examination outcome is like very low, because they should have theoretically looked at your work and know where you're at in the process, and that yes, this student is has put in the work and is it's good to go to defense. They should not be doing that if they don't think that that is the case. And I don't know if this helps anyone put in ease, but it's something that I thought of in my mind, is that at the end of the day, if your supervisor and committee is pushing you to go to defense and something and you're not ready and everything goes very poorly, it also doesn't necessarily reflect well on them, right? As your supervisor, your committee. So if that helps with your ease of mind, again, they won't be encouraging you to go to defense if you're not at that point where you're ready. At least a good supervisor and committee shouldn't be. So tips to prepare and tackle that PhD defense. I have quite a few for you, and they're also on our website, so I'll share the slides and the links to that in a bit. So in terms of preparing, what can you do? What are some tips? I want you to think about the defense timelines early on. So in terms of like, talk with your supervisor and look at our backwards planning tools, which I will also link you to figure out like realistically, like how long does it take between the time that I draft my dissertation, find an external examiner, plan in a defense date, the display period in between, the timelines that happen after that, like potential revisions, paperwork to become degree complete. Check out those timelines early as possible so there aren't like surprises later on in your degree when you get to this point. And I talk a lot about that when I present at Rock Your Thesis as well. So if you have been there, you may have heard me talk about that as well. I think it's been valuable to brainstorm a list of questions you might be asked and practice responding to them, whether by yourself or with other people, and think about the bigger picture, which we're also going to get to on the next page as well. And so what I did leading up to my master's defense and my PhD defense, and again, many of you in the room today may not be completely like this defense might not be your first time. So you maybe have a little bit of know-how of how to do this. I went through my dissertation and I picked out and I wrote down every single question I could possibly think about that someone might try to poke a hole in or ask me about or ask me to expand on or ask me how it might relate to something. Anything under the sun that I could possibly think of, I wrote down, and I started kind of just brainstorming how I could respond to some of these questions. Now, the kicker is that many times when I've done this, and I've done this because I've had to defend comprehensive exams, multiple pieces of my master's, my PhD, like 99% of the time, I do this massive list of questions and wouldn't get asked a single one on it. And I'd get asked something that was like totally like left field or something I never even considered as a possibility. But even if in the possibility that you don't get asked a single question on that list that you pre-brainstormed, it's still valuable to do that question list. And that is because it practices in your brain the brainstorming piece, the coming up with responses on the spot, thinking of outside of the box, thinking what you could be asked, how you could respond to different pieces. That practicing in itself is going to be useful even if the questions are not on your pre-idea list. Then tips to prepare, I want you to think about previous topics your committee supervisor may have mentioned. So they may have actually left you little breadcrumbs or foreshadowing of what they may ask you at the defense. Like for example, meetings with my supervisor, there were a few times like in the months leading up that he had mentioned, I can't remember it now because it was a few years ago, but there was a specific topic or section of my dissertation that he mentions, again and again, about, how it being tricky or whatever the case is. And I was like in my head, he is going to ask me about that at the defense. I'm going to put that in my back pocket and I'm going to prepare some potential responses with how we navigated this. So if you're seeing those topics or conversation prompts popped up, maybe in comments that they've written in previous drafts, emails, just mentions to you, meetings, whatever the case is, make sure you jot those down because there's a good chance they're going to bring it up at your dissertation defense. You could schedule a mock defense. So I've seen people do this where they've invited, family, friends, other grad students, even staff, employees that if the people that were working at the university, you can schedule kind of a mock defense and people can practice asking you questions. You can practice your presentation. So it is good practice if that's of interest to you. I didn't personally do it, but I can definitely see that it was helpful for a lot of people. So I'd recommend it for sure. Look at your thesis with as much of a critical eye as possible to figure out where those questions might come from on defense day. So again, your dissertation is like your mental child, right? You've put in so much work, so many years and effort into that dissertation and that work. And sometimes it's like easy to be overlook some things or push some things aside because you want it to be, as perfect as possible. Which at the end of the day, no dissertation is perfect. They say the right dissertation is a finished dissertation. So look at your dissertation, do another read through and pretend you're in someone else's shoes and you look at that with as critical as possible because those are where the questions are going to come from on defense day. And again, no research is perfect. We all know that as PhD candidates and whatever the case is. No defense is perfect. No dissertation is perfect. No research is perfect. Even the ones that get published in the top tier journals. There's always going to be something that someone's going to ask you about or try to poke a hole in it. You can also, like I mentioned, those defenses are open to the public. What this means is that you could theoretically go to a defense. Go check one out. Your department even, or a colleague, a friend, whatever the case is. You can go watch the process kind of played out that we've talked about today to help you prepare. And another thing that I've seen this come up at every single one of my defenses and the defenses that I've watched is to think about the bigger picture. So those are the questions that might push your thinking a bit further than what you've been scoped in to do for your work. And we're going to talk about what I mean by that. So thinking about the bigger picture, and your supervisors have probably been having this conversation with you as well. When we're doing, I'm actually going to put on, maybe I can use a laser pointer. Yeah, but maybe you can see this. If you don't, it's okay. I'll explain. So the picture on the left, this I know it's a bit grating because I kind of cropped it from the larger picture, is that, batch of flowers. Pretend that is your dissertation work, right? This is the scope that you've done your work in, you've done your literature search in, you've done all the data collection, the analysis. This is what you have focused on for those last 4 to 5 years or whatever the case is. What people are going to start asking you about at your defense is the bigger picture. So when we go to the picture on the right, all the trees in the background, the mountain, the sky, those flowers that you talked about in your dissertation, they take place in a larger ecosystem. And this might not be for plant biology, right? In my world with crime and peer influence, how does this relate to, youth programming or, programming in schools, in elementary schools, or how do we teach our kids? Like all of these things that are larger societal institutions that are all connected in some way. you're going to start getting questions about those at the defense process of how it can relate to this, how it might be able to contribute to this other programming that this organization might do, how you'd be able to make this larger in the future. What project is coming next? Where can you take this research? Where does it fit into the bigger picture in academia, but also outside of academia and society? All right. I'm just going to go to the next slide, but I need to try to figure out how to get off of the pointer now. It's not going to let me do it, so I'm just going to stay on laser pointer the whole time. All right, so the tips for preparing we just talked about. Now we're going to talk about the tips for the day of logistics. So it's finally your defense day or the days leading up to it. What are some things you can do? First, I always tell students, and I've always done it for all of my defenses, bring a copy of your thesis to the defense. Yes, like physically go print that sucker out from Staples or at home, whatever the case is. Print the whole thing out. Bring a notebook with pen, pencil, and water. And of course, maybe if you don't print it, maybe there's a way to, like, of course, lessen the use on paper. Maybe you're printing on both sides of the paper. Maybe in your case, you bring a digital version. Whatever the case is, bring a copy of your dissertation to your defense. And this is because I've had questions in my defenses where it's like a committee member is specifically asking me a question about a certain page or even a specific paragraph or sentence in my dissertation. And so if I don't have a copy of my defense and my dissertation, I'm not going to know what they're referring to because the thing might be 150, 200 pages. And so if you have that copy with you, you could go to the exact page and paragraph that they're talking about and even be like, oh, I'm just going to take a minute and read this. Take the time, read what they're talking about, and then you can talk to them about whatever question they're asking you. So it is very valuable to do that, but also to kind of write notes right in the dissertation copy of where exactly the questions are popping up, so you can go back later. I recommend bringing a notebook with a pen or pencil. Typically, people use this for, well, both jotting down ideas for other projects later on, but also feel free to take time. When you get asked a question, you can take time to write down the question, look at it on the paper, and think about it in your head before you open your mouth and start responding to your committee. So that will really help you, set it and embed it in your brain before you fully start formulating that answer. And of course, water, because you gotta stay hydrated. It's that 2 or 3 hour process. It takes a long time. Your mouth might get a little dry from all that defending. Plan your space in advance. So think about things leading up to your defense. Does your location have good Wi-Fi? Do you know where the room is that you're defending in? Try to get access to that room ahead of time. Play around with the tech. Get familiar. Get comfortable with the space. Easier said than done. I want you to try spending time relaxing beforehand. Make sure you get a good night's sleep as much as possible leading up to your defense. A relaxed and well-rested brain is the brain that's going to be on top of its game at the defense. Plan your transportation, your outfit, anything possible that can be planned in advance. Think about it in advance so there's no surprises day of. All right, tips for during your defense. So we've talked about preparing for the defense, the day of logistics leading up to the exact moment of starting. These are my tips for you during your defense. Like we already talked about, keep the presentation simple. A lot of the, really meat of the presentation component, all the content that you're going to be talking about will be for the questioning period. So keep the presentation simple and neat, in under 30 minutes. You will need to show to your committee that you can critically think about your work when answering questions, of course, that we talked about. It is important to note that not everything needs to be defended. So if a committee member points out to you of like, I see you did this thing here, but I think this might not be the best way, or this might be a little bit of an issue because this, and this. If in that process you realize like, oh, this person is right, like I should have altered this a little bit or said this a slightly different way, it doesn't mean that every single one of your answers has to be no, like you're wrong, like, which I don't recommend saying at all, but it doesn't have to be everything in defense. It sometimes, depending on the context, the best answer may be, that's a good point. I can see where you're coming from this. I could, and I will change that in the revision stage. And that's important to know. Like as a scholar, as an independent researcher, to make that transition, not only is it important to be able to justify and defend your work, but it's also important as a scholar to know when you may be have erred in a certain way or may have to change something. That is what makes a good researcher, right? And so to know when to say that instead, it can be important, even at the defense. You can ask for clarification and take time to think before responding. So again, as soon as a question is done, you don't have to start talking. You can say something like, that's a great question. I'm just going to take a minute to think about it and really let it sink into your head, into your brain. Think about it. Think about how you maybe want to respond, and then start responding to the question. This will help you come together with a clear, more concise, and accurate answer for your committee. Don't treat the question responses like a speech. And I am also like very bad for this. And your committee members even asking the questions for you may also not be the best at this. What I mean here is that if you go to respond, if you kind of ramble on and you make this massive long response, the larger and larger it gets, it may actually be getting weaker and not stronger. So think about the question, make it, it's not necessarily like short, like a 2-word answer or a sentence, but make it concise, still comprehensive, but direct. Don't get too into the details and weeds of all over the place. If they have a follow-up question, they will ask you. And I want you to remember that at the end of the day, you know your thesis or dissertation better than any other person. And that includes every single person sitting in that room on your committee. You're the one who spent years doing that work. You're the one who revised and did all of this work and this writing and went to the resources and did the data collection, the analysis, all of that. You know your work better than anyone else. So just keep that in mind. It's a confidence booster. If you are doing your defense remotely or online, here are some additional tips for you. 1, make sure your device and or software programs are updated. And, I hate when I like using Zoom for things like this, but there's sometimes where it's like, Zoom needs to update. And then I'm kind of out of the loop for 5 minutes, right? So make sure ahead of time that everything, if possible, is updated and ready to go. Make a contingency plan to continue your defense with your committee ahead of time if technology fails. So typically, you'll have a plan with your supervisor, like, if the call cuts out, this is what's going to happen. Someone else, like my supervisor, will call me in through phone or whatever the case is. Just make that backup plan. And then if something happens, something crashes, because we all know how great technology is, especially at the right times. That if something happens, like your Wi-Fi fails temporarily and you accidentally get booted out of the call, or a committee member does, that a plan is in place to make sure things can, continue. Make sure that you're in an area with, of course, reliable internet and no distractions. So would not recommend doing your PhD defense from like a Starbucks cafe. Would not recommend. Make sure your device is charged and you have your charging cord with you and probably plugged in actively so you don't have to worry about it during the defense. When we're dealing with online spaces, like for example, like today, I see there's 40 people in the room, but I can't see your faces. On the day of, you should see theoretically, unless there's issues with like connectivity, you should see your committee's faces on the little tiny boxes on the screen. But at the end of the day, and some of you maybe have done sessional teaching work and know this if you've done online, is that it's really hard to read body language, facial cues, all of those things in an online environment, especially on Zooms, MS Teams, whatever. So don't try not to distract yourself by trying to figure out what other people are thinking based on their face. Because people's facial reactions may be very, maybe more subtle or just like not as out there as if they were in person. But whatever the case is, you might get yourself like worked up or nervous trying to figure out like, oh, I don't think this person liked what I said based on their face expression, whatever the case is. Just try not to read the cues and the faces and all of that while you're presenting and answering questions if you're in the online. And even though you're doing online, I'd recommend bringing the same items as if you were in person. And that means the copy of your dissertation, pen, pencil, water, notebook, all that good stuff. All right, we're getting closer to the Q&A because I see there's a lot of Q&A, which is amazing. Here are the common questions that I get, so which some of them might be answered that were in the Q&A. I just finished drafting my dissertation. Can I defend next week? No, unfortunately, you cannot. So if you're at a point where you're like, okay, I think my dissertation is good to go to defense, there's actually this entire timeline that still has to happen before you actively defend. And so some of the things were like I was talking about earlier, figuring out that external examiner piece. There is a display period time for PhD students. It will be about 8 weeks that that call goes out to the university committee saying, hey, this person's defending. And this is also the 8-week period that your dissertation goes, the final copy goes to your defense committee, goes to your external examiner. They have to have time to be able to read it and think of their questions and all of that good stuff. So there is this kind of point where it becomes hurry up and wait, which is kind of the point in time that you probably make your presentation for your defense and do those mock preps and all of those things. But no, unfortunately, if you're done your dissertation today or yesterday, you can't defend next week. You're probably going to be defending anywhere from 2 to 4 months out from now. We do have backwards planning tools that I was talking about. I'll send out the slides. There's a link in here, and there's a link at the end as well to help you with that timeline breakdown. Can I get accommodations for a defense? Many people are surprised to figure out the answer is yes. So accessibility services is actually on campus and it can arrange accommodations for every single graduate milestone, whether it be comprehensive exams, qualifying exams, field work, research, and defenses. So they're not just there for coursework. So if you found yourself in a situation where you may need accommodations for a defense, please, I recommend reaching out to accessibility services as early as possible so that can be arranged and figured out and sorted so that it's in place for your defense. You get to your defense, something happens, and you think for some reason, whatever the case is, that it was unfair. So can I do anything if my defense is unfair? The answer is yes. So a first steps would be to reach out to your supervisor, department, or associate dean in your faculty for graduate studies. If it's not resolved at that case, you can file an official petition or grievance under Policy 70. And there are resources and people across campus that can kind of help with that process as well. But a petition under Policy 70 basically means that you are saying that the process was fair, but due to extenuating circumstances should be reevaluated or whatever the case is. A grievance is when you think something has been unfair. You were treated unfair by committee members, your supervisor, the grading was unfair and the decision was unfair, and that you actually should have passed or become accepted. That would be under Policy 70. after I defend, am I officially done my degree? And a lot of people are also surprised to see that the answer is no. So in order to become officially degree complete at the University of Waterloo, you must have your dissertation accepted into UW Space, which was that online archive that I was talking about earlier. This could be anywhere from 1 to 4 months after your defense. Again, like I was talking about, that timeline depends on what level of revisions are required for your dissertation. So the dissertation that you have today going to defense may not be the dissertation the final copy of the dissertation that gets submitted here. Once it is fully accepted into UW Space, there is a form to fill out to say that your degree complete, but at that point you are considered done your program and have done all of the milestones to get your PhD at convocation. Are there resources to help me prepare for my defense? Oh yes, there are so many. Here's some examples. So for graduate studies and postdoctoral affairs, we do have some on our website, like those backwards planning tools that I was talking about. There's faculty specific as well to help with that. We have defense tips on our webpage. We have a specific webpage for remote defenses. The Writing Communication Center is a fantastic resource to help you prepare for that presentation piece, help you with answering questions for your defense piece. Some for examples of their programming, they do have appointments and walk-ins and things like that, but Rock Your Thesis and Design and Deliver Grad Studio, I would especially recommend. And then all the other some examples of great resources, Campus Wellness for counseling, wellness strategies to help maybe even calm your nerves around defenses can be quite stressful. The Graduate Student Association for advocacy and programming, the libraries, if you have things related to copyright that might be related to your dissertation, or you talk about thesis embargoes. The Center for Career Development is now a lot of us finishing your PhD. You may be thinking about what's coming next. Are you applying to jobs in industry, nonprofits, government, whatever the case is? You may be looking to jump into academia further. You may be looking to jump out of academia. So to make that transition out, so we do have the Center for Career Development. They have excellent career advisors there to help with that process. The Student Success Office is, of course, always there for various training and opportunities. And like I was mentioning, if you are in a case where you may have a troublesome or hard to navigate relationship with your supervisor or a committee member, the Conflict Management Office and the Ombudsperson are also great resources to have those conversations with, of how to have maybe those difficult conversations. And after your defense, don't forget to celebrate. That is a massive accomplishment that I have no doubt all of you are going to see one day. And I wanted to share some of the celebratory pieces for myself. So the one on the far left with the sparkly gold background is that at our PhD graduate celebration, we actually run that through GSPA. So I actually planned that event, and then my colleagues let me attend it as a attendee because it happened to me when I was convocating. What it is this really cool dinner event that we run twice a year around convocation times, specifically for PhD graduates at Fed Hall. It's a buffet dinner. There's speeches from graduates. We have a photo booth. We now have implemented also some other really cool photo opportunities, like large, shiny, bright, like PhD letters. And once you get to that point, I highly recommend attending that event, which will hopefully continue. So that was me with my supervisor, Dr. Owen Gallup. The middle picture was me right after, well, a couple hours after my defense, when I went out for dinner with my husband and my friend, who had defended her PhD a couple years before me. And then the bottom right corner is when you defend at the University of Waterloo from your master's thesis or your PhD dissertation, you can head over to the Graduate House run through the GSA and get their free Chalice of Champions. And so it's a free pint of beer or non-alcoholic drink I don't personally drink alcohol, so my chalice of champions was full of cranberry juice and water. And so you get to drink out of this really cool glass and take a picture with it for free. So whatever the case may be, whether you treat yourself to a vacation or a trip or go out to dinner, have a party, remember to celebrate because it's such a massive, fantastic achievement. So we've come to the end. I know there's so many questions that I'm going to get to right now. If I don't address your question today when we go through the Q&A, or if you have additional questions that pop up, you can always reach out to us at Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs. And I have the email down there as well, gradexperience@uwaterloo.ca. So with that, I am also going to stop sharing my screen for a second. I'm going to get to the Q&A, but before I do that, I do want to just quickly pop into the chat the upcoming events that we have through GRADnavigate. So we do have one coming up for comp exams, which I imagine probably isn't applicable to most of you, but we also have one on how to say no, and we have the one on the final year, we're calling it. It's a new in development workshop that I'm currently working on, where we're going to talk about the alumni benefits and what happens, really at the tail end of your degree at Waterloo. So recommend signing up for those. All right, so I'm going to head over to the Q&A and see what we got over here. All right, I'm going to start from the top and make my way down. We'll see how many we get through. How does the internal external change with the new schools and the Faculty of Arts? That's a good, well, it's a good question. Okay, I don't know the answer for the external. Would be like it wouldn't make a difference because it's fully outside the university. But in terms of the internal external, like for example, with mine being from sociology and my internal external was from psych. But again, they're kind of being pooled into those schools and the Faculty of Arts, like this person is talking about. Have a conversation with your supervisor or department coordinator to see what will count. My guess is that they're going to be honoring these like field, there's still going to be like field pools of experts, right? Like the psychology is still going to be an expert that's not going to be heavily with like the legal studies, right? And so I still think you're going to most likely be able to choose your internal external from the different pools of experts in these schools. That would be my guess because they're clumping quite a few of them. But have that conversation with your department because that's an excellent question, and that's really all that kind of rearrangement is really new. So I'm gonna look into that myself as well. We have a question on how many adjunct professors are permitted to serve on a defense committee. I also don't fully know the answer to that. I believe being told it was like one or two. They definitely can't make up like the majority of her committee or anything like that. The majority will have to be the specifically outlined people, like we were talking about, like the appointed member, your department, your supervisor, all of those pieces. But there are also cases where those list of committee members that I mentioned are kind of like the minimum. There are cases where people have additional people sit on their committee, which in those cases, maybe they do have more adjunct members if they're adding to the committee above the minimum 5 requirements. So again, have those conversations with your department. Who is responsible for finding and choosing the external examiner? That is department and specific. So for example, for my case, like I was talking about, I had more of a say with choosing the list of the priority of who we should ask. So I did some research online and which academics may fit my work well enough to be able to sit as an external examiner. So it will either be most likely you and your supervisor doing that work or your supervisor in committee. So have a conversation with your supervisor to specify like who is actually responsible, who will be doing this. It most likely is not going to be someone completely random because at the end of the day, this external examiner has to be someone who can speak to your work. And so at the University of Waterloo, like we don't have a ton of people who, you know, research one specific thing. And so if you and your supervisor are the only ones at UW doing that specific niche research, then it doesn't make sense for like your department chair to go find an external, you know what I mean? Because they are not as familiar with your work. So there's a good chance that it will be you and your supervisor or your supervisor and committee. But ask your supervisor how it plays out in your department. I have both a supervisor and a co-supervisor as adjunct, 5 people total. Do I still need an additional member? I'm sorry to say, I also don't have a firm answer for this. I want to say you do, but I would say again, ask your department on that one, and I'll also look into it. I'm sorry, there's a few that are. It is tricky. There's some of these that are. It really is dependent on the situation. In so you know, like it might be that you don't need, because in my case, I did have an adjunct member that that was treated as an additional member. Yeah, so you might be just okay with the 5, but confirm that with your department. Does the external just go to the defense, or do they see the thesis beforehand? That's a great question. So they actually theoretically should read your entire dissertation. So that's what that time frame is needed for, that 8-week display period, what they call it, is that time frame that your dissertation should be sitting with your external examiner and your committee and all of that. Theoretically, your external should read your dissertation and come up with questions in advance that they want to ask you. They also, and I'm not fully confident if this is faculty specific or school wide, in the Faculty of Arts, what the externals have to do are they have to actually submit basically like a preliminary report to the university with initial comments on the dissertation that will kind of imply if the dissertation is good enough or defensible enough for in their eyes. And at that stage, your supervisor there's rules around what they can tell you what is in this preliminary report. Like they can tell you kind of like the general gist of like it's a positive report, but they can't tell you exactly what it says. They can't tell you the specifics of what they're going to be asking you about or anything like that. Maximum number of members who can serve on committee. I don't know the answer of that. There's technically, I don't think it's specified under the university guidelines of a maximum. However, I really strongly don't recommend like getting too out there with adding everyone in. I've had some friends that have kind of learned that lesson the hard way of, you know what, if you've ever heard the saying like too many chefs in the kitchen, the more and more people you add to a committee having input of what you should write in the dissertation chapters and what you should do here or there and here, the more people you have involved, like sure, it's more brain power, more ideas. It's also like more conflicting ideas, and it might actually really delay things and make things more complicated for you. And so there are pros and cons. I honestly would not recommend getting like too many people on your committee, to be honest. But in terms of the maximum, I don't think there's a necessarily restriction. Again, check with your department. How do we handle questions that we might not know the answer to? That's an amazing question, and one I feel like is like a very popular one that I should have probably addressed too. At the end of the day, like I was mentioning, you might get some questions that are really like left field, or were out of the scope of your research, or maybe were something that you just that were related that you just straight up just accidentally didn't consider, or you missed something. There's so many millions of things, right, to think about, and so you can't get them all. At the end of the day, you can be honest, but you can kind of practice being strategic with your wording. And so what they're hoping for, if you're in a situation where you don't know the answer to, it doesn't mean that you're going to have to redefend. It doesn't necessarily mean that you've failed that question or anything. What they're looking for in that circumstance is for you to, do some scholarly kind of brainstorming of how you may address that in the future or look into it. So, an answer might look something like, oh, like, thanks for bringing that to my attention. I actually hadn't considered that before. I don't have the answer for you at this time, but I imagine it would relate to this, or maybe it would be something that I'd be interested in pursuing in the future. So again, there are kind of ways to bounce around it, and kind of do those connection pieces. But the other day, it also might be an answer of, thanks for bringing that up. I hadn't considered that because it isn't quite in the scope of this dissertation work. But it might be something I'm looking into later, or it might relate to this other thing. So there are ways to basically say, I don't know, but still show that you are thinking about potentials, if that makes sense. Can the defense be held off campus or in another city? That is a great question. I have never seen that come up before, like physically in person in off campus or in another city. I mean, don't hold my word for this. I'd ask your department, but theoretically, I don't think that there is a necessary restriction for it being in person physically on campus. We mostly have restrictions of who has to be at the defense and asking questions on the committee. But for example, if you rent a venue off campus to do something, if that's the line of thinking, I mean, it could be a possibility. I've never seen it come up before, but it's I can't think of a rule that it would be technically be breaking as long as the committee members that need to be there are there. So if that is of interest to you, that's a super interesting idea. Ask your supervisor if that's a possibility, and it might be. Do adjunct professors need to hold a PhD? Typically, from my understanding, any serving committee member has to hold a PhD. I would double check that, but I'm fairly confident of that they have to hold a PhD, or at least have like expertise equivalent in that field, to be able to evaluate and judge. But if you're asking an adjunct professor to be on your committee, well, most adjunct professors, many of them probably do hold PhDs, but I would say had someone with a PhD, but ask your supervisor, and I'll look into it as well. And you can reach out to me at gradexperience@ubarludu.ca. But I'm pretty sure they either have to have a PhD, but there may be special circumstances where if they can show that they have enough equivalent experience in that area. How do you handle a challenging external examiner? I've heard some horror stories. Yeah, I mean, and that's a possibility, right? And to be honest, this is where it's a really big benefit if you're able to play a role in who you might ask to be an external examiner. So you won't be asking, but to put a list forward of who could potentially serve as an external. Like for example, what I did when I was looking around, not only did I look at the field that they were doing work in, I went and looked at, student reviews of them as teachers, as lecturers, as professors. I tried to find any information about them online that would help me kind of get a sense of who they were as a person and how they might bring themselves forward to my defense if I were to ask them. I would also, at the end of the day, there's also going to be academics out there who are very hardcore thinkers in one way of doing things, and that are very, they voice themselves to be very against some other ways of doing things. So if you're doing this other thing that they have been known to be very vocal about in publications or whatever against, maybe don't put them on your list. If they're the only ones in your field doing that work, you might have to, but if you can avoid it and choose someone else, then you can. At the end of the day, at least the external examiner is only one member on your committee. Some people can be just more challenging at the end of the day, like any other humans. I would just say try to stand your ground and answer the best that you can, and know that you're going to get through it. And hopefully, if it's a situation like, for example, like they're wrong for whatever the sense, then your supervisor may also stand in a little bit and have your back. I've had that happen before in a defense-like scenario where there was actually a situation where like my supervisor and committee members, they had a conversation for like 10 minutes back and forth, like trying to like academically going back and forth about something, which probably is not the norm. But at the end of the day, people get involved, they have different personalities, and sometimes it can be a challenge. Have those conversations with your supervisor, and the best advice I would be is to kind of do that background work of who might be serving on your committee to get a sense of who they are. Even looking them up on, the social posts that they make online. They have to be an arm's reach from you, but that doesn't mean that you can go looking around online to find pieces of who they might be. To what extent is the examining committee permitted to ask questions beyond the scope of the written dissertation? I don't think that there is a technical, like, written down restriction of what exactly they can and cannot ask you questions about. But if they're asking you, if every question they ask you is completely unrelated to your work, then that would be an example that, and something happens where you get a re-examination for the defense because of that, that would be a situation that I would recommend formally filing a grievance for. I'm just going to look through the more questions. I'll answer as many as possible, I know. There's a question about at what time do we submit the dissertation through GRADnavigate? I'm not familiar with that process, so I don't know. That might be something that's department specific, so I'd check with your department. There is like in terms of paperwork required after the defense, there's kind of there's a paper that your committee signs off on that goes to your department to basically that sheet is like the outcome of your defense. That gets submitted to your department and then up to the faculty, say, hey, yes, this graduate student successfully defended, and to mark it on their milestone completions. And then after that, you'll have to do whatever revisions are required. And we'll have to submit to UW space that we're talking about. And then I believe there is a form that's filled out, just like a degree completion form, kind of saying that, yes, you've completed it on this day, and you're good to go. What happens in the period between submitting a final thesis and defense? Are you permitted to interact with your supervisor, committee, department? Yeah, you can interact with all those people. You just can't interact with your external examiner. How much time should we spend on background material in our presentation? If you're thinking like literature review and things like that, I wouldn't spend too much. Most of that was probably covered heavily at the proposal stage. So really focus on research questions, the key findings for your research questions, implications of your research, that so what piece. Where can you find a list of defenses at UW? I would subscribe to the Daily Bulletin. They actually once a week send out in the Daily Bulletin, they actually have a list of PhD students that are defending over the next few weeks. So if you aren't subscribed to that, just Google Daily Bulletin, and then you can subscribe so you can get that every day, and it will give you the list. I think they have a specific day of the week that they send out that portion of the e-news on the Daily Bulletin, but I have seen it pop up in there from across campus. Are we expected to print color copies of our thesis for the examining committee? That is not a university-wide rule. So I didn't have to do that. That it could be a departmental thing, so I check with your supervisor, but that is not a university requirement. What's the difference between an additional member and an internal, external, or external member? An additional member is typically someone else in your department. Whereas an internal external is a faculty member in a different department at UW, and external is someone not at the university. How do the references have to be managed, or what's like the format of your PhD for submitting to UW space? We do have thesis kind of formatting guidelines that I'll link you to. I know it's 2:30, so if you have to head off, no worries, but I'll continue answering these last few questions as well. I will link you to them. There aren't like specific restrictions for the format of your references. That's kind of like more field specific. Like for example, for sociology, we deal a lot with APA, but if you're dealing with in engineering, maybe you're using a different format for references. But the link I just put into the chat is for the general thesis formatting guidelines that have to be followed in order for it to be accepted into UW space. If these formatting requirements are not followed, then you'll get it returned back to you and you'll have to fix it before resubmitting. And that's where a lot of students get a little bit delayed because a lot of them get returned back from GSPA, like 75%. I worked for GSPA and I had my PhD dissertation sent back to me. So it is very easy to miss little tiny pieces, but if you can be thinking about those things ahead of time, I definitely recommend. But that's okay. That's fantastic that you're using Zotero as a reference manager, because I always highly recommend using a reference manager. That will majorly help you later on. Does the Rock Your Thesis have an online component? It's available in the fall. If you're this person's in BC and unable to join in person, the Rock Your Thesis, I believe they do have an online component. I believe I was talking to Nadine the other day. Yes, they have a Rock Your Thesis. Actually, they have an asynchronous version as well. So you could even look at it right now. There's a guidebook about the content that they cover. And it looks like the next Rock Your Thesis dates will be in the fall and winter. Sometimes, depending on where they're hosting it, they have a hybrid option where they can do online as well. Sometimes it's only in person, but again, that link I just sent, they do have content online as well. Is it usual for the supervisor to ask questions during the defense as well? That's a great question. Yes, your supervisor will be asking you questions alongside your other committee members during the defense. I have a manuscript-based thesis with 2 papers published. Does this affect the likelihood of getting accepted versus accepted conditionally? From my understanding, like it wouldn't be considered as like part of your defense process, but I will say that if these papers are part of your dissertation work and they've been accepted by a journal and published, right? Like that's a good sign. It means the science is good. It's there. So I would say it would, like theoretically, it would make it more likely that your dissertation be accepted because you could point to say, hey, this work has actually already been published, right? So it's definitely a plus. In terms of the report for the thesis, it's just the external examiner that does that. Yeah. Do different committee members carry more or less weight in the decision-making process? Not per se, but I would say that if you're at a defense and your committee is having a conversation about the outcome, if the examiner and the external examiner is the one that's major, like if they're waving red flags and they have an issue, then that may sway more than just like your internal, external, or the other random member of your committee. Are we expected to hyperlink references throughout the document? That's not a university-wide requirement, but it may be at your department level, so have a conversation with your department. My thesis has already been published in 3 parts. How important is it that no text phrase from such a paper appear verbatim in my thesis? Fantastic question. I'm going to link you to the library has supports for this. On like, because it is tricky, right? Because you don't want to plagiarize or issues with copyright with yourself in previous work. So I don't like it. I feel like this page may not be super helpful. I haven't done a read through right now, but the email at the end of this web page, copyright@uwaterloo.ca, I think you should contact them and have a conversation with them about that. I feel like that would be related. Okay, that's all the questions. I feel like I got through most of them. If I didn't, feel free to contact me. If you're here because I had one of the questions that I did not have the answer to, feel free to reach out to Grad Experience. Put it in the chat. And I can try to find those answers. Because some of those questions were like very unique that I haven't seen come up before. So I'm curious, I'll dive into it. Feel free to email me and I'll go diving for those answers. So thank you for joining me. I feel like this has been a great conversation, really great questions, so many questions in the Q&A. If I don't see you again, good luck at your defense. You're going to rock it. It's going to be great. I wish you all the best and hope it's a good experience for you. Again, we do have more events coming up if you feel like coming out to those. And I hope to see you one day at our PhD graduate celebration. So again, this was recorded. I will post the link on our website and I'll share it out as well. But have a good rest of your day.